All right. Hey, it's Steve Deur here. Just wanted to share something, try to do it quickly, something that's been kind of impacting for me. As you may know, there is in discipleship a process by which Jesus did things. Um, and that process um, Jesus began by providing information, his words. These are the words of Jesus. Um, Not only did he provide information, the teaching of Jesus, the words of Jesus, he provided imitation, the ways of Jesus. Here, follow after my ways. The Apostle Paul said it this way, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And then when it comes to discipleship, not only do we have information, the teaching, the words of Jesus, imitation, which is the ways of Jesus, we're also called to do the works of Jesus, and to innovate. And so you got to have another I, right? So innovation, which means learning to put that information, that teaching into practice in your own context, to innovate in your own context, to learn to lead out yourself. The missing piece most often, though, is that imitation. So often it's so easy for us to go immediately from information to provide a Sunday morning teaching, to say, here's what it is, now go do it. And then get frustrated with people for not knowing how to live out the teaching because they need to see what it looks like. So as a result of that, we're called to not just give information and expect innovation, but to provide imitation. And so the goal is to move from information, the teaching, the words of Jesus, and then say, okay, here's the deal. Let me help you imitate. Here's what it looks like with skin on. Let me help you incarnate this. Here's how you begin to pray for other people. Here's how you share your faith. Here's how you study the scriptures. Here's how you throw a party and invite your neighbors to. Here's how you begin to serve those in your community. So you give something to imitate. You invite people along. And then once they've seen it, they can then begin to put it into motion in their own life. Now, here's the piece I want to bring out. There are different spaces and places in which Jesus navigated. Joe Myers, in this book, I think it was Search to Belong, identified these different spaces. One is that intimate space, right? That's the space of, under, 1 to 3. And then there's that personal space. And that personal space could be anywhere from, 5 to 12, maybe, kind of a small group size. And then you've got the social space, which is anywhere for Jesus, that was up until, probably the 13 or 20 to about the 72 who followed him that he sent out. And then for Jesus, he also had the public space, which was the crowds, right? So you've got the intimate space, we'll say up to 3. The personal space, we'll say up to around 12 people. And then the social space up to about, we'll say 70. And then the public space, and that's just as many people as you can fit into an arena. And so the question is, how do we disciple people in each and every space? I think when we think of discipleship, it's most often comes in the sense of one-on-one. And yet Jesus, there's very few times, I can't think of any time. I mean, he met and talked with Nicodemus, but as far as discipling people, taking people on a journey of transformation to look like him, to behave like him, to do what he could do, he did that always in at least the smallest unit for him was 3, Peter, James, and John, bringing those 3 together. And so you always see it. It's a communal thing. Discipleship is a communal thing, not a one-on-one thing. That's mentoring. That's good. That's accountability. That's helpful. That's a part of it. I'm not going to say it's not a part of it, but I think we miss out sometimes when we miss the fact that we need each other for discipleship. And so how do we begin to imitate? And so how do we give people a picture to imitate in the intimate space? How do we give them a picture to imitate, in the personal space, that life group size? How can they see imitation in a social space setting, and then how in a public space setting? And each of those are different. And so I imagine, in an intimate space, you have a lot more access to your life. They can see you, warts and all. That's the most intimate space where you can share what's going on in your life. You give access to your life. Personal space, people have a lot of access to your life. They can see your life. They can be a part of your life. Social space, again, that's they don't have as much access to your life, but you can do some things together on mission. But the one thing that's really difficult is, how do we get imitation in the public space, in the worship gatherings themselves, in those times when we're gathered together with a crowd of people, and you're sharing the good news of Jesus, the information. How do you move then to get to that innovation, where that gathered space in that public space, those folks who are there, the crowd, can begin to see what it looks like? And if you preach, you know what I'm talking about, because here, when you're preaching, you know how the challenge to try to bring out the right story, or to bring out the right illustration to reveal what it really looks like, because that's that tension you're feeling, right? Here's the information, now go do it. And one thing that we've kind of we know to be true, but I think we're starting to prioritize more as a faith family, is the importance of giving imitatable examples, imitatable stories in our gathered public worship space. And the most powerful thing for that are stories, testimonies, stories on video, people sharing their stories, people, telling the stories of people. And so it could be an interview with someone, how they do something in particular. So we did a series on work, and I spoke with a doctor who's a part of our church family. And I just interviewed him. I said, okay, so how is it that you go about seeking to share your faith through your work? And he just talked about how he did it and gave some of his examples. We recently had someone say, I just really feel like I need to share my story. And we were overjoyed and videotaped her story. And it was very powerful. And it was just a moment of seeing how God transforms a life. But I think hearing stories, telling stories, whether it's through video or live, interviews, analogies, whatever, I think it's important that we provide space for imitation in our gathering space. And for me, that even comes down to worship. So for me, I like to stand up in the front row, and I, first and foremost, I'm there to connect with God, right? And to worship him. But I'm mindful too that I'm in some ways a spiritual father, one of the spiritual parents to our faith family, God being the ultimate father, but I have a responsibility and a role, and a leadership role, and seek to guide people. And Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And I wonder, I try to apply that in my own life to go, learn to worship like me as I'm seeking to worship God. So for those who don't maybe know how to worship God or to engage God, whether it's in music or other ways, I want to provide an example, not a perfect example, but a living example of someone who's just seeking God. Whether or not they raise hands like me or have got the moves like me during worship is irrelevant. But can they see what it might look like? For them, they can figure it out. They can innovate. They don't have to be like me, but do they have an imitatable picture? And so I wanted to share this today with you. What do you think are some ways to increase the imitation piece in the public spaces that are usually very heavy on information and then desiring people to go innovate? We need more opportunities for that imitation piece, I think. So for you, what are some of the best practices you've come across? some things that you've seen, ways in which you yourself have done this or been helpful for you. Just love for you to share that. I hope that's been helpful, or some things to think about today, since I'm putting off my Christmas Eve service,
No.
I should say gathering. We don't do services, we do gatherings. Thank you very much. Christmas Eve gathering message. So I thought I'd rather talk to you. So what do you think? Any thoughts? If you listen to this whole thing, you deserve a Snickers bar the next time I see you. So thanks, guys. See ya.